There's a simple playbook for happiness, and we've been given this message since we were young kids. Study hard, get a good job, scale the ranks, and make a lot of money. Then you'll be happy. Yet why do so many of us feel unfulfilled, lost, and without a purpose?
The problems in our world are the result of selfishness and separation and isolation. They're not anything else.
That's Stephanie Harrison, an expert on the psychology of happiness and the author of the book, New Happy. Stephanie thinks that when it comes to happiness, our rugged individualism and our obsession with money is making us feel disconnected and empty.
If you don't feel inner value in who you are, then you can go out and you can try and get it through achieving stuff.
Her New Happy philosophy emphasizes helping others, understanding our physical pain instead of blindly striving for that next promotion. Speaking of striving, if you're an ambitious professional looking to make a bold pivot into a new career that is more intentional and purposeful, we have a group coaching program for you over at radreads.co/coaching. Now here's my interview with Stephanie Harrison.
I actually wanted to start off with something from your book, which is Maslow's hierarchy. And so maybe describe a bit about Maslow's hierarchy and how that fits in with this question of happiness.
Love it. So I would imagine that most people listening have seen Maslow's hierarchy before.
Yes.
If you haven't, it's a triangle with a bunch of different layers, arguing that there are base needs at the bottom of the triangle and then your self-actualization needs at the top. And essentially the idea that really has been part of our culture, I would say, is that you have to climb up the pyramid. So you can't pursue self-actualization if you don't have self-esteem, for example. And this is really interesting because it's based upon Maslow's research, but Maslow himself actually never put it into a pyramid form. That was something that was done by a group of consultants, and they were trying to streamline and identify and communicate some of his core ideas. And part of what I think is really interesting about this is that it communicates a lot of wrong messages about happiness, but we don't necessarily have the language or the understanding to pinpoint what those problems are, because it feels really intuitive to say, yeah, of course you can't, pursue self-actualization until you've done A, B, C, and D. But in reality, Maslow's pyramid, first of all, is not correct in terms of the fact that you're never going to satisfy all of your needs. You're just not. Life is a process of constantly having new needs come up and having to fulfill them and kind of going through those motions. And we all know that because we all have to eat every day and sleep every day, right? We all are constantly in that process. And you know that if you get a bad comment on your performance review at work, that you're going to need your wife or your partner to boost you up so that you feel a little bit better in terms of your self-esteem. So we're always fulfilling our needs. And not only that, but those consultants actually missed one of the needs on the pyramid, which is the need to go beyond yourself, to not think about yourself and to devote yourself to others. And so after my research, I've come to the conclusion that actually the secret to happiness is helping other people to be happy. And you do that in a way that can fulfill all of your needs at the same time.
That's beautiful. Well, first, leave it to consultants to
Totally.
to take a great idea. And so I guess so if I think of the hierarchy, right, so the basic needs, food, shelter, safety at the bottom. In the middle, it's like autonomy and I think relationships and love. And then at the top, it's self-actualization, which loosely, my words, it's like finding purpose and deeper meaning and life satisfaction and so on. And I do think it's a convenient look. I as someone who, I write to an audience that is in that pursuit more of the top of the pyramid. I think that I often find myself relying on Maslow's hierarchy more to not seem like a out of touch elitist a-hole, because I'm focus on what makes you come alive or your deeper meaning, and then all these people will be like, but I'm living paycheck to paycheck. And I'm like, well, I'm not talking to you, my writing is not specifically speaking to you. It's so I could see, I that's how I interact with it. But is there no actual hierarchy to it? Is it like a blob? Or I just...
The metaphor he used is of a ladder where you have your hands and your feet on different rungs, which I think is really interesting to think about. you have one hand on this, relationship one and one hand on the self-actualization one and your feet on the base one. Um, and the image that I use it's funny, I was literally just working on this image this morning for some things for our ebook. So it's very top of mind for me that you asked this question. But the image that I use to communicate this idea is, if you imagine those different bands of the pyramid, if you take those bands and then you put them into an asterisk, a circle where they're all overlapping, that's what it's really like. We're all pursuing all of our needs all the time.
Yeah.
And that's how it should be. Like, it shouldn't be that some people get to pursue self-actualization because they're rich, or because they, won the genetic lottery, or because they have privileges and advantages. They should get to pursue all of their needs as well. And I personally think that it's our job to help people to fulfill their needs. It's our responsibility to help one another. And when we do that, we actually experience the happiness that we're looking for. And by helping other people, we can experience, increases to our self-esteem, better relationships, that sense of feeling like we matter and that we belong and that we're growing as a person. And so ultimately, I think that having a different model, or thinking about, instead of thinking, oh, I'm going to help people once I climb up my pyramid and satisfy all of my own needs and self-actualize into this wonderful best version of myself, that's fundamentally impossible. There's no way you can be the best version of yourself if you're not helping other people.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. Like an infinite loop of sorts.
Yeah.
Well, I think, as I was reading your book, one thing that really struck me is something that I think about often. And I have my own direct exposure to it, is kind of like, well, individualism, like hyper individualism, and then capitalism, and kind of the interplay between those two. And so, I see that, like, in this capitalist lens, it's always like, well, you got to be careful. Like, it's a very like fight or flight evoking, where it's like, you got to be careful for this. And so it's almost like you have to be on guard about so many things as it comes to like your sense of self, that like to give the mind space to others is challenging. But I also think that, I also feel like the myth of individualism that, supposedly like this country, America is like built upon, it is just, it's so distorted and destructive. And so I'd love to hear kind of where your work or how you have observed this kind of like deep individualism and how it ties into it with capitalism.
Totally. So basically, I argue that we've been conditioned into this societal set of values about the things that we think matter and the things that we think will make us happy. And I call it old happy. So that's the shorthand I'll be using. And so old happy is the result of many of those capitalistic, individualistic, and domination-oriented forces that teach us that you always need to be productive. You need to push yourself more and more. You can never stop. You have to beat other people. Your self-esteem is defined by how you are compared to the people around you or the people that you see online. All of these messages that destroy our souls and like eat away at our well-being. And the interesting thing about, as you say, the myth of individualism is it's just a myth. Like, it's just an idea that we have cottoned onto. But there's absolutely no way that anyone can ever do anything by themselves. Like, anything that is ever done is enabled by the efforts of other people. But when you have this idea that, oh, I'm a self-made person, or I can do this all by myself, I don't need anybody else, what do you do with that energy? Like, where do you go with that? What are you left with? You're left with those capitalist values of, well, I'm going to go out and seek to earn more and more money, or prove how much better I am than everyone else, or acquire certain things because that's going to give me the self-esteem and the fulfillment that I'm looking for, that really can only be satisfied through our connections with other people. And I think that untangling these stories is a really important step of unwinding these old happy influences so that we can find the happiness that we're looking for.
obviously like people will say like Protestant work ethic, right?
Yeah.
Like, what did you uncover? It's so deeply entrenched in our value system. Whether I'm thinking of, was it Emerson's book, which I actually haven't
Yeah.
read, but like self-reliance, right?
Hmm.
Or bootstrapping, like even to lift yourself up by your own
Totally.
bootstraps, which another guest pointed out. It's like that's actually not possible. Like someone else has to do it for you. How in your travels and research, kind of how did that myth begin, and why is it still so pervasive?
I think, it's funny, like there was this fancy French guy who came to America way back in the day and toured around and sort of called out individualism as one of the values of the culture that he was seeing sprout up. And it was furthered by many of the cultural myths and narratives that sprung up, whether that was, through like the Western culture and, settling the front and all of those types of things. And the extreme focus on self reliance as individuals were making a new country, it just really kind of started to get its tentacles into absolutely everything. And as we have come into the modern age, unfortunately, I think what we have failed to attend to is these values, because everything that we're making is built on top of these values, right? Like every piece of technology that we use throughout our day today, it's built upon those core values. And every piece of media that we consume disseminates them in different ways. And so now it feels so pervasive and really hard to untangle ourselves from, but it is possible. And the first step is, in my opinion, like with everything, right? Self-awareness or awareness of what's happening, starting to pay attention to it and where it shows up, like I don't think most people have made the connection yet that the reason that they struggle to ask for help, like every single person I've ever talked to does,
Hmm.
like has a very hard time asking for help.
Yeah.
It's because of individualism. It's because we've been conditioned to believe that we're only good enough if we can be self-reliant. And when we can start to make those connections, it becomes a little bit easier to start to tease those out and then hopefully make changes.
Yeah, yeah. That's so true. Like that, it is. I find it so, there's like shame in
So much
asking for
shame.
help,
Yeah.
right? And
It
I bet
shows that
if
you're
you,
not good enough, right? Like in our value system.
Mhm. I bet if you kind of unpacked the individualism and this, like there's so many layers of shame, like kind of at,
Mm.
at every juncture, which I actually think that your type of messaging and the way you present it in your art is something that it actually disarms. It kind of takes away from that element of shame, meaning like if you struggle to ask for help, then and you show someone that like lots of people struggle to ask for help,
Yeah.
then immediately you've kind of disarmed
Mm.
that sense of shame. Like, oh, like I think you probably get some version of this as well. But like when I write in these topics, people will say to me, I thought I was the only person
Right.
who felt this way. I'm like, no, no,
Yeah.
no. Like tens of thousands of people feel this way, and
Yeah.
you probably see that as well in your
I
art.
do. And honestly, that's been the greatest gift. If I think about what has most affected me personally on this journey, in many ways, it's been seeing how all of those things that I thought were a me problem were actually a we problem. Like in the
Mhm.
process of attending to and supporting my community, I've discovered that we're just not really different at all in any way. Like we have so much that we share. And I used to feel a great sense of existential loneliness. Like a feeling of no one gets me or I'm kind of all alone in this, like kind of those feelings. And ever since I started doing this work, I don't ever feel that way because I know that I can see I'm not alone. Like I can see that other people feel this way. And even if I don't know them personally, it gives me great comfort. And I where's the shame in that? There's no shame in that if we're all experiencing it.
Mhm. Existential loneliness.
Yeah.
What a beautiful and powerful phrase. When if you think, like, when did you start to feel that existential loneliness?
Honestly, I feel like I felt it my whole life. So I don't know about how other people have felt, but I can remember being a kid and sort of feeling that way. And maybe it was because of not like having kind of the emotional language in my family to talk about those feelings, or, the space to be like, I'm a very sensitive person. It's probably no surprise to anybody. And I used to feel very ashamed of my sensitivity. I used to feel it's a liability or a big problem. And when I started doing this work and making the artwork, especially because I couldn't do it without that sensitivity, I was able to kind of reclaim that in some ways. And also that's what abated that sense of loneliness in terms of, oh, I'm the only one who feels these things so deeply or
Yeah.
who struggles with it. You know what I mean?
Mm. If you don't mind me asking, like, when you interact, that emotional, like, no one gets my emotion. I'm paraphrasing
Yeah.
what you said. Like, when you went to caregivers,
Yeah.
caretakers, or peers, like, what was the message that you got or that you internalized as it relates to your feelings
Mm.
in those moments?
I think like you're too much. That was always the feeling I had. Like you're too much. It's funny. It's you're too much and you're not enough at the same time,
Mm,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
I think a lot of people feel that way from what I can tell. You can never quite measure up, but that's one of the evils of old happy. It's this idea that there's this list that you can fulfill, and if you can just figure out how to change yourself or to get yourself under control or whatever it is, then you'll finally be enough. And you do it and then it doesn't work. How awful is that?
Yeah. Have you, in your work, have you stumbled across the topic of, it's called childhood emotional neglect?
No.
CEN, it goes by. I just like read I'm reading a book on it,
Mm,
just kind of in passing, in part the result of doing some work on my own like attachment behaviors. That's kind of like having me revisit, different like caregiver responsibility relationships. But there's this element where it's you have all of your physical needs taken care of, but your emotional needs are untended to. And so, like, as a man in like an immigrant culture where it's like the culture of immigrants is very much like emotions are like farts, pardon my French, just like bottle them in and
yeah.
just like don't let anyone know that it's there.
Yeah.
And so you take that, you add the fact, that like as a guy, you're like not
Yeah.
supposed to have these emotions. And I'm just starting to like realize, I'm like, God, I haven't really
Wow.
felt emotions my life. Like, I'm a happy, like content person, but like the full texture of life's emotions, from like the most difficult ones to the highest and most blissful ones,
Yeah.
like, I don't feel like I have that range, right? I feel like mine is
Mm,
like, I mean, my wife will sometimes say, she's like, you hug me like a robot, It's like, and so I wonder though, like, so that existential loneliness, like, how did you try to like fix it or cope with it in the early
achievement.
days? Okay, say more. Just
Yeah.
speaking our language.
Yeah. Achieving more and more. If I can
Mhm.
just get that thing, then I'll feel
Yeah.
okay on the inside. Yeah. I think of achievement is the currency of value in our world. And if you don't feel inner value in who you are, then you can go out and you can try and get it through achieving stuff. You can try and fill up your bank account, but it doesn't work.
Yeah. What did you say? Achievement is the currency of our world.
Yeah.
Oh, God, you give me chills just thinking about it. Oh, do you think that message for you was that message, like that message to me was direct, like
Mm,
go get good grades, go
yeah.
X. How was that message present? And then obviously, like now in hindsight, I could see it like media and, like the
Yeah.
way like a handsome couple or like the way a successful person is
Totally.
depicted. And like, even I always think about there's the Philippe Patek watches. It's like the copy is like, you don't buy a Patek, you just hand one from one generation to the next. I was just like, oh,
Wow.
it's like, wow, that you can like, it's a fucking watch. I was like, as a copywriter, I'm like, that is the most brilliant copywriting
Yeah,
I've
yeah. I
ever
mean,
seen.
kudos to that person. They
Yeah.
earned their paycheck that day. For the
But
rest of us.
yeah, so how did the achievement message come to you? Do you remember like the most poignant or salient one that like, that motivated you / probably not at you at the same time?
I think that I was always rewarded for being intelligent as a child and for grades and for all of that. And I was told that, that was special and, I would get positive feedback and reinforcement for all of that for those achievements. And so I think that was part of it. I think I have two very high achieving parents and they were very I think they always wanted me to just do what made me happy and encouraged me to do that. But I also had them as examples, and I like, my mom was an Olympian, and
Wow.
my
Talk about achievement.
yeah, so my dad was like the smartest person ever and ran his own businesses and very kind of built a career from nothing, very like kind of driven and motivated person. And so they always wanted me to just do what made me happy, but it also is hard when you have those examples of, who your parents are and all that they've been able to do. And I think in many ways, I think a lot of it also growing up when I did in the time period that I did in like the 90s and the late 90s and early 2000s, I think a lot of it was media messages as well, like so much toxic stuff for women at that time, for men too. I'm just not as familiar with it. But like your appearance and, like finding a boyfriend and dating and blah, like just like so much stuff, like being thin enough, being pretty enough, blah, 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 like just the list of qualifications and everything like that. And so I don't have like a moment where I can think about it. It was more just like something that was not presented to me, but seemed obvious. Like this was the way to fix me. That's how it felt. Like that was the way to fix the kind of the pain that was within me. Like that was the solution.
Oh, thank you for sharing that so openly. I can so relate. I still feel that pain. And I'm like, it's just like achieve. It's coping and it's like a drug. Like it's just the high goes away quite quickly, especially with time. I'm curious, as someone who has two young daughters, do you think that media messaging for young women, has it changed? Because I'm not in touch with that messaging. It's definitely changing the way it's distributed, right? Social media. I mean, now they're like, it's like my 10-year-old talks about like Sephora, like the amount of like skincare that like 10-year-olds talk about because of, they don't even watch. I mean, some of them watch TikTok, but like it's just so omnipresent. But I'm genuinely curious if you think that how that's changed, because you probably have like a closer pulse to it.
Yeah. I think in some ways it's better and in some ways it's probably worse, like I wish that wasn't the case. I think the kind of, when I think about that time period, I think there was a lot of really, very strong, I guess, like we're calling it diet culture now, especially around appearance and weight and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's a really, that's why I think every millennial and older woman like me has such, I think most of us have like body image problems because of that. And I think that it seems like things are a little bit better now in terms of less of that overt pressure in many ways.
Yeah. Like the
I
Victoria's Secret type
Yeah,
campaigns, how
yeah,
those
and
have
like
evolved. And
exactly, and like just the kind of glorification of only a very specific body type and a very specific and it had to be a white woman and they had to be like look this certain way and be extremely thin and all that kind of stuff. I think we've come a long way in terms of being more accepting. We obviously still have a long way to go, but and the ways in which it's worse, like I think that I don't think that social media is the problem. I think that it's how we use it and how it's regulated, but also the fact that most of us aren't equipped with the resources and the tools to be able to kind of parse it effectively and support our well-being. You know what I mean? Because it can be a powerful tool for good, and it can also be if you're operating under a certain worldview and you log on there and you spend your time looking at people who you are negatively comparing yourself to, that can be terrible for your mental health. So it's also like, how do we I think like if I think about if I had kids and how I would be wanting to coach them through this and support them, it's like, how do we instill these core values in them of the fact that they're enough and that they matter and that they don't have to change who they are, so that when they log on, they're not pulled into a spiral around that, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's super, having my eldest is just starting to like enter into that world of, social cliques and then like the appearance stuff. So that's,
It's
and I mean,
hard.
we talk about this often because to the point, you were sharing, you're very high achieving parents. I'm the same as a parent. I'm like, I just want you to be like, I literally don't care where
Yeah.
my daughters go to college. Like I couldn't care less. I don't care what careers they want to have. I just want them to be happy. But then I also like look at the behavior. Like I'm intense, and I'm way less intense than I was 20 years ago. But by their standards, they're like, you work all the time,
Yeah.
right? And
Right.
I'm like, I work like 35, 40 hours a week. I used to work
Yeah.
100. So,
It feels
like,
really different for you.
yeah, I'm like, I genuinely think I'm semi-retired. And they're like, you're the hardest working like person we've ever seen. And so there is this like, what is it like? Do what I do as I do, not do what I
Yeah.
say.
Right.
Because I think most people listening to this podcast are driven people,
Yeah.
and many of them have kids. And I would think that like 98% of them would be like, just want my kids to be happy.
For
But then they're
sure.
like banging out emails at, 10 p.m. on a Saturday. It's like,
Yeah.
what's the messaging there?
It's so true, isn't it? Like we do just copy what we see over and over again. And I think like I often have people ask me like, how do I teach my kids this? And how do I do this? And the first answer I always want to say is like, work on it yourself and then talk about how you're working on it, right? Like
Yeah.
for me, if I think about things that would be really meaningful for me, like I would be, if I can imagine like having a conversation with somebody and saying like, hey, I find it really hard to untangle my self-worth from what I did that day. It's really tough for me. And some days I do an okay job. And some days I feel this pressure to work more and more. And that's why I end up banging out those emails at 10 o'clock on a Saturday. And I know I shouldn't, but I'm still having a really hard time.
Yeah.
If you were like a parent saying that to your child, I think that it would be a really meaningful
Yeah.
and rich conversation to have.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I have amazing parents. They always purported as like being flawless in that they never shared
Yeah.
anything that they struggle. And I struggle to share what I'm struggling with
Yeah.
my, with my kids. But I wonder this achievement thing, right? I think I forget the name that you have in your book. I call it the when then trap. It's like
Yeah.
when I get X, then I'll feel Y. I think that's part
Yeah.
of the old happy.
Totally. Mhm.
Did you? Because the people listening to this are like they're gunning for that promotion or like buying their first home or
Yeah.
retirement, whatever it is. How did you step off like, what's the ruse of that belief in that belief, and how did you kind of break that pattern?
To me, the ruse is that if you can achieve these things, all of your pain will go away. It's not that you'll be happy, it's that you won't suffer.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, I think.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
if the promotion eliminates all of your pain and suffering, then it's worth it to suffer right now, isn't it? To put those late nights in and to neglect your family and your hobbies and your health and blah, 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 all that stuff that we've all done before. But the problem is, obviously, it doesn't work. So then you get there and you've just suffered a lot to get there. And you think, why the hell isn't this working? I must have chosen the wrong thing. I have to keep going or do more. And that's how people end up trapped in that cycle, I think. So I like to ask myself as a very casual conversation question when I feel myself getting stuck in this, like, what suffering do I think is this going to eliminate? What wound am I trying to heal with this? And maybe, just maybe, there's actually a much more direct and better way to heal that wound.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, do you think that, do you think people know, like, when you frame it that way, what pain, instead of what happiness am I trying to achieve, what pain am I trying to numb or rid myself of?
Yeah.
Do you think people know the pain that they're trying to heal?
Probably not.
Yeah.
It's a really good question. Probably not until you attend to it. Yeah. Like, because I think most people, I think your experience, what you described about having everything kind of contained and suppressed, I think that's probably the norm for a lot of people, right? Like, and it's why we have, like, speaking of men, like, it's why we have such a massive mental health crisis among men, because they're not given the support and the tools and the resources to feel and express their emotions. And I think a lot of people feel, I know I felt this way. Be curious to hear what you think. I know a lot of people feel like if they open that, like, box lid on the pain, that it's going to volcano and explode everywhere and they won't be able to handle it.
Yeah. And I think you're spot on. I hear this often because I'm a big proponent and advocate of meditation, or some kind. I prefer to say stillness practice.
Love that.
And I'll tell people, like, hey, just try it. Like, I'm not here just like 40 minutes. Just like try it for 2 minutes. Try whatever. Just see if you can what it's like to have some quiet in your mind so you can observe your thoughts. And the biggest pushback that I get on meditation, usually from men, is I'm scared of what it's gonna, like, I'm scared, like, once I make everything quiet, I'm scared of what's gonna come out. And it's fine. There's like such a sidebar, but I've been recently binge watching Peaky Blinders. I don't know if you ever
I've only seen
watched
the first couple episodes.
Basically, the guy is like a Tony Soprano kind of badass gangster, but he has so much pain from fighting in World War I. And so every episode is like a new challenge for his gang. And then he, like, vanquishes the challenge. A lot of people close to him die. He almost dies in like every season. And then there's this piece where he gets a bigger house. He has another kid and all that. And he goes crazy.
Wow.
In that silence. And he needs to, like, start a new war with something. And anyway, that was a bit of a side note. So there is that element of what, I don't know what it will open up. And I do think men, I think as a culture, men in particular, we have the EQ, or the emotional EQ of a child in that regard. Because the minute that some kind of uncomfortable emotion arises, we're told to suppress it. And once we're of age, then we start, like, using, like, consumption, like alcohol and substances, or there's, like, a ton of distraction, video games, pornography, sports, now, like, legalized gambling, cannabis. Like, there's so many ways to be like, I'm feeling something come up in me. Like, what can I buy on my phone? Like, let me go bet on tonight's Knicks game. Because like, it could just take away this this thing that I'm feeling that I
Yeah.
refuse to sit with. So I do, I do feel. I mean, I felt that I had no role models
Yeah.
for it.
What
I've
were you
never
supposed to
seen my dad
do?
cry.
What are you supposed to do in that case, right? Like
Yeah,
how like it's no one's fault. It's no
yeah,
one's and all that does is just add more shame on top of the existing shame,
hmm,
doesn't it? Like, oh,
yeah,
I'm such a horrible person because I can't handle my emotions now on top of everything
yeah,
else, right? Like,
hmm,
and it's so devastating because, like, I think we can see so much of these problems that you're talking about in a lot of the, these young men who are being radicalized because they don't have support and communities and an outlet like you're talking about for processing these feelings. And it's
yeah,
totally normal. And men feel things just as much as women
yeah,
do. Like,
yeah.
I get annoyed when people talk about like, oh, men and women are so different. Like, really, like, we're all humans, like having a human experience.
Yeah,
We are socialized differently, sure, and there are some differences, but at the end of the day, like, we need to support one another and be
yeah.
there for each other.
No, it's fun. You would appreciate this quick little anecdote. So that thing I said about people being scared to meditate
Yeah.
because of the fear. Lisa, my wife Lisa and I, we did a psychedelic journey together
Mm,
with a therapist assistant, so with like a therapist,
yeah.
and they were like, "What are you scared about?" I'm like, "Well, I'm actually." It was like on steroids version of the meditation question. I'm like, "Well,
Yeah.
I'm really going to be outside of my body and my consciousness. Like, like,
Yeah.
what if I don't want to be married anymore? What if I
Yeah.
hate my work? What if I like want to just disappear?" Like, I was like so
Yeah.
scared, and I was telling the fears to the therapist, and then during the journey, I saw I faced the fear. I was like, "This was what you were so scared of," and it was basically like like Kirby from Nintendo, like
Yeah.
like the squeezy ghost. I
Mhm.
was like, and in my head, it was like, you're just a big squishy love ball. Like that's on the other side of all this fear.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, like that. And it was like, like there was so much like hardened edge to me, and like I'm a pretty chill guy, but still like there's like below all of it, there's
Yeah.
just it's like deeply loving, caring person that has like put on different layers of armor, mostly like kind of achievement slash success
Yeah.
related, alcohol, like that kind of stuff too. And it was funny. I'm like, that's all it was literally just like
Wow.
a squishy level.
I love that. I mean, that's such a beautiful story. And like part of what I think would be so healing for all of us is just to recognize that like that loving good nature of yours, like that's what we all are. Like
To
that's who we
everyone.
are
Oh,
deep down, right? Like we think that there's something wrong with our cores, like that we're horrible and flawed and broken and twisted and evil and all that stuff. And like as you beautifully described, we put up that armor, but all that's doing is just getting in the way of being and expressing our loving good nature. And it's there, like, however you can
yeah.
access it, whatever helps you to get in touch with it, that's what really matters, I
I
think.
I love it. And so let's pivot to the new hat. We spent a lot of time on the old happy, all the wounding and the scars and the armors and the resistance. I love this idea of like, or this principle of you're not on this island alone. This like, I think that a lot of people struggle with that. Either
Yeah.
they see someone else as competition, or they don't feel like they have the shared humanity. There's a like
Yeah.
an othering of the like a
No.
implicit othering of the person. So I'd love to hear like if someone wants to kind of build and train that muscle of
Yeah.
cheering others on and
Yeah.
togetherness. How do you advise them to do that?
I think the first thing is this method that um, I call finding the overlap, which is what helps us to go from feeling separate from one another to being connected to one another. And basically, you just want to imagine that you and the other person are, I like to use this visual imagery of they're a circle and you're a circle. And how do you get them to overlap? And one of the best ways to do that is to look for another person's like good, loving nature, what we were just talking about. So, like I hear you tell that story and I feel so connected to you because it so shows who you are as a person and how like wonderful you are. And I don't feel like that's what makes me feel close to you as a person and also like treasure you, right? Like to treasure someone. And that's what happens naturally in our some of our closest personal relationships or in therapeutic or coaching relationships. But like looking for another person's goodness is like watching them do a favor for somebody or thinking about a time they were kind to you or helped a stranger or any evidence that you have of their wonderful best qualities really instills a sense of love within you. You can also look for the things that you share. So identifying, hey, we have this in common, or we felt the same way before. We've been through this together. And then when you're connected, like, why would I ever begrudge you your happiness? Because your happiness is my happiness, right? Like we're connected. And so the happier you become, the more that I can benefit from that and flourish from it as well. And this idea that like my happiness and your happiness are odds is like this very, very depressing notion about that instills that sense of competition within us. And all it does is distract us from the real sources of well-being.
Yeah. That's so beautiful because I never thought of happiness as being like we act as happiness is a zero-sum game.
Exactly.
Like if you're happy, there's less happiness for me to have, which is so batshit crazy. But I'm like, God, so many people act that way.
I know I did as well. It's like we treat it like money, right? We treat it like, even though like
Goes
technically we can print money whenever we want to. Like it's like importing that capitalist notion, as you're saying. And it's objectively wild to think about it when you have that lens on. You think like, why on earth would anything that I feel ever detract from what you get to experience or what you feel?
Yeah. And I think it goes back to, it's that pain, right?
Yeah.
It's because if you get to experience bliss or like something really happy and I feel like I can't experience it, it's not because you experienced it. It's because, and you took it away from me, it's because my pain, my suffering doesn't allow me to experience it in that moment or possibly ever in some cases.
And it to your point, like it exacerbates the core wound as well of like, oh, I'm not good enough to get that thing or to have that experience. And again, like it comes back to this idea that happiness is an achievement that you can, order at a store or like work hard enough to acquire. And we fulfill happiness for each other. Like that is, so it's not an achievement that you can go out and get yourself. It's something that other people help you to experience.
Yeah. And so in practice, is that like calling up a friend that hasn't done this and that you haven't seen in a while and making them feel seen, or volunteering at a soup kitchen? It's like, what does that mean in practice?
It's a really good question. I think there's like sort of levels that you can pursue that depending on your context and your goals and the demands in your life and all of that stuff that you can sort of think about. The basic one is like simply just try to be kind.
Yeah. Like
the kinder you are, the happier you'll be. So that's like the basic kind of, if you can integrate more kindness and compassion and empathy into your life, you will be happier. And the second is to think about how you can organize your life more around those values. And so whether that's through your work or your family or your community or through the broader world, how can you share of yourself to help other people to experience more happiness? And that can take like a million different forms because we all have, unique gifts that we can share with the world. And really it's about finding what brings you joy to exercise, what helps you to grow as a person, and then also figuring out where you can contribute those gifts to problems that might be affecting other people's well-being.
A little like ikigai, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Was there another? It sounded like there was another level that I cut you off on.
That's it. Well, and then it all builds up, and hopefully that's how we can make a happier world together. Because if everybody is devoted to other people's needs and other people's problems, then there's no problem that we couldn't solve. There's
Yeah.
no issue that would be too big for us. The problems in our world are the result of selfishness and separation and isolation. They're not anything else. So all we need to do is to adopt new values and then to try and live as best we can by them.
Yeah. As you were talking, one of the things, and this has actually shown up a handful, a bunch in our marriage, is the ability to show others that you see them, right?
Mm,
And so,
yeah.
like, it's kind of classic, in a man-woman marriage, it's like
Mm,
woman wants to feel seen,
yeah.
man offers solution, right? And there's the old trope that's been there, but like I've seen that in my own relationship
Mm,
where maybe something happened and either I'm like, oh well, screw that person, or next time do this, or you know you have other friends, you don't need this
yeah.
person. And like categorically every time it is like, I don't want, like, just, can you just acknowledge that I'm angry right now? Or can you just
Yeah.
acknowledge that I'm sad right now? Or that I'm frustrated? Which is funny because it kind of, it shows the interconnectedness of it, is that like, because of my own wounds, I
Mm,
don't feel, I don't want anyone to see me that way. Or
oh,
I don't think I
yeah.
want anyone to see me that
Right.
way. I actually do, but I don't think
It's
that I
too
do.
scary. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I'm just like, well, I don't want anyone to be like, oh, you're angry right now. Like, I'm like, no, like stay away from me. So
Yeah.
it's so,
Totally.
like it kind of just reinforces that element of
Wow.
togetherness,
Yeah.
right? That is tricky because like you have to heal yourself in
Yeah.
some regard to be able to see and kind of experience
Yeah.
others
Right.
fully.
And what's really interesting about healing is like we heal through others too, right?
Yeah.
Like we heal through relationships with therapists or with coaches or through loving communities that show up for us or a partner that makes it safe to be
Yeah.
seen. And so, again, like one of my issues with a lot of our online discourse about mental health and stuff is it's all so individualistic in many ways. And like this idea that you can heal yourself, like you can't. If you're healing yourself, even if you're like doing it alone in your house and you never talk to anybody, presumably you're using somebody's book or
Yeah.
someone's research or someone's coaching knowledge or whatever to use it. So,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
it's never happening. We're all enabled by other people.
I never thought about it. Like we do, and that's why there's such a big business. It probably does, like it's a very practical, it's a very financially lucrative thing to say like you can heal yourself.
Totally. It's great marketing, right?
Yeah.
Like it's exploitative in many ways as well. And I think a lot of people are doing it without question. Like
Yeah.
it's just one of those assumptions that's so baked in so we don't ever question it. Like and people hold their sacred cows closely, right? Like no, it's hard and scary to challenge some of these ideas that are so fundamental that they seem like the truths and like inescapable in some ways. People don't like when I say that the secret to happiness is helping other people because we've been told that it's something we can do for ourselves. And it's
Yeah.
vulnerable to have to rely on other people. It's hard and scary, and
Mhm.
that's okay, but we can get through it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, there's so many of these, mantras like you control your own
Yeah.
happiness, or like you can be happy, right? And it takes away from the interconnectedness of it all. Which, by the way, if you, not to get too much on a tangent, but if you go into many of the Eastern spiritual,
Yes.
it's all about this like
Exactly.
togetherness, that there is no, and in fact, so many of the traditions, whether it's meditation or the different prayers and rituals, are about letting go of that
Hmm.
sense of
Yeah.
separateness.
Exactly. Exactly. And like it's so interesting to me that like we've taken meditation as a practice,
Mhm.
the individualistic practice of
Yeah.
meditation, and we've stripped it of all of those community and interconnectedness
Yeah.
bearings, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's, oh man, leave it to the capitalist engine to, right? To feed it and spit things out. Well, I love, as my last question, like, what was the most, in kind of the new happy, what was the most we spent a lot of time on the togetherness. What was the most surprising thing that you uncovered in kind of this new paradigm of happiness?
Hmm. Such a good question. I think that what surprised me, one of the things that surprised me the most was just discovering how this is a message that's been out there and been championed for thousands of years. Like, I found examples of these core ideas in Buddhism and in multiple other religions and spiritual traditions and in each like philosophy, Greek philosophy, and in indigenous thought, and like all of these just different disparate bodies of knowledge and of wisdom that have been built over the years. And it's all pointing in many ways to the same thing. And I think that gave me a lot of awareness of how like little we've changed, how we've been trying to figure this out for such a long time. And two, it also helped me to feel more confident about sharing it because I was really nervous. I still am. I am very nervous and very scared and anxious about it. And I think that having that felt very kind of like affirming to me in some ways. And also, again, just like we're all just muddling through this human thing, right? Like we're all just trying our best to figure it out. And maybe that's just the human condition. And can we find happiness as we're muddling through rather than trying to arrive at this place where we've got it all figured out? Yeah, exactly.
I think for our separate conversation would be like, well, what is the role of secularism in all of this?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure I haven't thought deeply about that question, but as you're talking, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's like everything we've been saying has been. You pick whatever religious tradition, like it literally doesn't matter. They just say,
all covered.
It got this all covered. So we'll save that one for another conversation. But I do think, and I think that's what unites our work and what makes your work so special and touching is that you are bringing. I see that you could feel these like feelings of anxiety and nervousness of like being, proclaimed as the expert on X or Y or what by others, not taking the mantle yourself. But you are and you have been muddling along in this pursuit of, happiness, satisfaction with, your fans, your massive, community. And so that's the proof right there that it's happening.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. This has been incredible, Stephanie. I'm so glad
to talk to you. Thank you so much for having me. This is one of the best conversations I've had in ages. I'm so grateful to you.
You are too kind. Tell our listeners, and we'll put it in the show notes and in the description about the book, where to follow you, email newsletters. You're everywhere in a good way.
I won't bore you. You can find everything at thenewhappy.com or on social at New Happy Co.
Awesome. And then the book will be out when this releases.
Happy. Yes.
New Happy. Amazing. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you.